James, so I found you by taking your course on Seminary now, and I wanted to ask you, like, how long you've been teaching and presenting, because you're dynamic, and then I went and looked you up on YouTube and saw a bunch of other things you've done in live speeches. And so, first of all, I just want to let you know that I think you're a dynamic speaker,
Uh,
and I wanted to hear
Thanks.
like
I'm
a little bit about
blushing.
your experience. I wanted to hear a little bit more about you, like your craft of teaching, how you've like improved on that, and then also a little bit about your academic and spiritual journey.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I'm glad to. I guess I'll tackle the first thing first. Well, thanks. That's a huge compliment. And thankful to Jesus. Gotta keep that humble. No, no, and probably the first real like formal training came around. I went to Gordon-Conwell for seminary, and I got to learn under Haddon Robinson. The silver tongue himself. He wrote like the textbook on biblical preaching, and he was the first to really just challenge us to preach without notes. So our first kind of thing in, and he's making us preach without notes. And then what he would do was record the talk as we were giving it in class, and then give commentary about, like, he's in the back room with a microphone in real time, making
What?
comments about your talk. So good and so helpful and so unnerving and
Dense.
so helpful. And since then, just took that and just kept trying to grow as a speaker and teacher from the training there and to teach without notes. Probably the other thing was last sabbatical that I took. I took a comedy class here in Los Angeles, and it's a stand-up comedy class. Whoopi Goldberg is an alumni, and they had some pretty strong people. There were some industry types that are like my partner was Gary Busey's wife, that kind of stuff. Uh, it was so frightening, to do like a 1 minute, three joke set in front of people, to do some of the comedy stuff. But I felt like it was, well, if this is all it did its job was it made preaching so much easier because nothing's more frightening than trying to get a room full of people to laugh. And we didn't have, I'm the only Christian by far in that room. They're always trying to get me to cuss or to say something saucy in the room. And so to try to not even use clean language and try to tell a joke in a way that would make people laugh. It's so frightening and so much pressure that preaching and teaching comes a lot easier now. So yeah, so that's there. The academic background, I got my MDiv from Gordon-Conwell. I have a Doctor of Ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary. And I got to teach courses both at Bethel. Well, I taught courses at Bethel on evangelism and leadership seminary when they had a branch in San Diego. And I'll be teaching a class in the fall on evangelism at Fuller for the Demon program. Sorry,
Oh, wow.
in May, not the fall, in May.
Wow. Well, I love like kind of your growth mindset. Like you're always like refining your communication skills, like even taking that class, like doing something as unnerving to like, I'm going to take a comedy class to like learn how to do this, like stepping out of your element and like pushing yourself in that way.
Oh, super fun. Yeah, and now, like, since we're in COVID, it's this new level of trying to learn how to teach. And it's funny, I've actually gone back during COVID to writing things out because I can use my computer screen as a teleprompter. And so now just trying to figure out different styles of teaching online. And it's been tricky trying to figure out how to do that. I don't think you have the same freedom or the same latitude. You got to keep things a lot tighter. And so yeah, I'm trying to do what you're saying. I'm not always great at it, but I am trying to learn.
I'm curious, like, yeah, during COVID, because we're all like on video calls all the time, what are some things keep attention? Because it's really hard right now. Like my kids, they're on Zoom all day in class. And I
Yeah.
see my kids, like my son yesterday, I walked over, he was on the floor, laying down on the carpet, just like sprawled out, just like exhausted from being on Zoom. And so
Sure.
it's really hard for students to be focused all day and really, really hard on the teacher who's having to talk all the time and try to keep students active.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious, like, as you've been like teaching and working on your own communication during COVID-19 and how do I best present during this time, have there been any like hacks or things you've learned, picked up to kind of help with your communication?
Oh, definitely. And if you want to learn more, InterVarsity, we have our whole ministry, our whole nationwide ministry went online right when the pandemic struck. Now some students are back, some aren't, but if you want to learn more, I believe it's InterVarsity.org. Where is it? It should be on the slash online. I believe InterVarsity.org/online should get you to a place where you can see, like, we've just developed a lot of stuff for you to like have better Zoom meetings and how to do spiritual gatherings online. And we've actually seen God move really powerfully, even like healing and prayer ministry online.
Oh,
That kind of stuff. If there's tips, there's lots there. We use Zoom primarily within InterVarsity, and that gives us some options. And I think the main thing is, as hard as it is to listen to a talking head in person, it's much more difficult online. And so we are liberal use of the breakout button. So that's just ask a question, break people off. If you have a group of 30 to 50, Zoom allows you to just randomly put people in groups of 3 and then randomly bring them back. It's just great. Like, you don't have to call people back and wait 5 minutes to get people back to the main room. They're just automatically, kind of like Star Trek, the transporter room, you're brought back, whether you like it or not. And then, so breakout rooms, liberal use of the chat to get response. So even it's been powerful to do listening prayer or responses to talks and then have a question that you put out and just have people put up things in the chat. That's been helpful to have a sense of community. But just trying to limit someone talking for a long time and pieces, bits. It's easier to bring in clips or video or other kinds of things. Finding also, and here's maybe the other one that might be counterintuitive, is we started off the shift with a lot of our folks creating like professional level worship videos and things that we thought would help engage.
yeah.
And I think we're finding more as this pandemic continues. That stuff actually has less draw. They can look it up. It's been cool, but I've seen people go back to just person on guitar, just more going back to more analog, less professional, more real, authentic. And so it's not as profesh, but it is something where students, everyone mutes because you don't get the sync. You can't sync the singing, but you can still have the person leading and then invite them to worship as they will. So we're trying a few things, but trying to keep it as interactive as possible is helpful.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love how, just hearing about how you're all testing to see what works best, trying out breakout rooms, getting the chat going, and trying to foster community during this really difficult time. It's super hard. It's really, really hard.
It is. And to have then a focus, if we create the spiritual spaces in the same way, so instead of just seeing our gatherings as information passing or even coaching, we are pretty deliberate in trying to create spaces where people can experience God. And how do you do that in explicit ways? And there have been times, powerful times, we sit in silence, or we might lead them through some prayers, like Ignatian style prayer type things, where we're allowing their imagination to inform some of the leadership of the prayer, and then say, like, what did you hear from God? And why don't you put that up in the chat? Those times have been like probably the most profound or the most meaningful, when they're just describing. They might even describe their how they're feeling. Like, I'm in tears right now. This is what I'm feeling, and it sort of allows you to be in a shared space spiritually. I think that's what's most important. Communal connections are important, but being in a shared space where, spiritual relationships are supercharged, right there. So if there's ways that we can keep explicitly making spiritual spaces where we're making connections with each other and through the teaching, finding those to be pretty powerful.
Have you found, like, during this time, as you've been like chatting with people one-on-one, that you're having more like deep conversations right now versus being in person? And the reason why I say that is because, like, I notice at work, my work environment has always been open, like very, very open. So if I'm chatting with someone, everyone can hear it. But now that I'm home, I'm like in a room and I'm very much alone. I'm talking to someone else who's also in a room. And I'm finding like I'm having some deeper conversation with people. Yeah, it's very fascinating. I didn't expect it. I'm curious, like, from your perspective from a church level. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I probably have less experience because Zoom, the pandemic sort of I have a very similar schedule. I'm a national leader in a dispersed movement. So a lot of my meetings are online anyway. So
Mhm.
I can what I have noticed with my friendships in the pandemic is it I feel bad for those on the other side of this. So if you're listening, I'm sorry if I haven't reached out to you. But there is a way that the pandemic has made my more important or my closer relationships more front and center, and sort of the ones that are more like weaker ties further back. So, because you have to take intentionality to meet anybody these days. You're not running into them at the water cooler. You're not running into them over the coffee machine. It's or after service. You're not doing any of that stuff. So if you meet with someone, you have to like say, "Hey, do you want to meet?" And that adds this extra. If there
Mhm.
is a depth, it's because you're being intentional. And so, like one of my best friends, we meet once a month to confess. He's my confessor.
Mhm.
And that would happen before the pandemic, but that's taken on another weight. And then other rhythms of other either ministry partners or friends that just keep me spiritually vibrant. I've been wanting to put them on the schedule more. And so there's more intentionality maybe to the relationships. Um, and finding that has led to depth.
Oh, I think it's interesting that you have like some deep connections, like at the level of confessor level, to just
Yeah.
you have that like a normal routine for yourself.
I need it. I have a spiritual director that I meet with pretty rarely, like twice a year. And then I have another friend, the co-author of our latest book. We just kept meeting after our book was written. Um, and that's been a lifeline because he's
Mm.
a pastor in a church, a large size church. And for us to keep thinking like, God, what are you doing in this time? And, what does revival look like in this time? It's just someone that you could be free. They're not going to judge you
Mhm.
and stoke the dreams that God's putting in both of our hearts. So I've got spiritual director, then like a ministry dreamer type, and then my confessor who just gets to hear everything. Those are brutal, but we've been friends for a long time, and that's also helped us. Maybe maybe to say uh, I like Bobby Clinton work. I studied under him at Fuller, and I'm in my 40s now, and you just can't have one mentor. Like in your 20s, you could have one mentor who sort of covers most of your stuff, like your discipleship and your leadership. And now, like I'm in my 40s, I actually need relationships, different mentoring slash either peer or real mentor relationships that get different aspects. So I just started a leadership mentor. I just called up an old
Oh,
mentor and said, "Can we start meeting again? Because I'm in a season where I can use more thinking about how I'm wired and where the Lord's leading." And I think he's 20, 25 years older than me. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, let's do that." So I'm different seasons, different relationships will have a higher weight than others. But I have found that if I don't do that, I'm sort of setting myself up to just fall. Bobby Clinton says, I think only 1 in 3 leaders like end well. They finish well is his language. Only 1 in 3 leaders finish well, and you're just looking at
wow.
the news and looking at everything out there. Like, I don't want to be another statistic as a ministry leader. And I'm more importantly, the positive side. I want to live like a fruitful kingdom life and not have like all these blind spots in my faith and in my character or as a dad. So I just need lots of these kinds of input and people I can be honest with so that I don't end up developing like this huge shadow side that ends up like taking over like in your 40s and 50s,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Exactly.
so trying. I'm not not successful. I know that sounds like it. That sounds really cool in theory, just yeah, I'm a work in progress just like any.
I love how intentional you are, even about thinking through those areas that you want to grow in or improve on. Like you just mentioned, leadership. So I'm curious, like, what were some of those buckets you've kind of identified for yourself? And then how did you begin to think about who would be a good guide to kind of chat with about those different topics? Because I think a lot of people are listening in going, oh, I don't even have a mentor. I never even thought out a mentor. What does that relationship look like? How does that even start?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a, for those of your listeners who are Myers-Briggs people, like I'm an ENFP, right? So I obviously, ooh, that's shiny. Let's chase that. that kind of mentality. So to say that I had this system, obviously for someone like me, it's gonna be more spontaneous or organic or something that comes up that way. So usually it's like a need in my life. Like, oh, I'm realizing this sin's got a hold on me. I need to start confessing. And then usually there's some like a book or some other confirming thing that just goes like, you better act on that or that's gonna become a problem. That's usually how these things go. So that the buckets that I shared, the people that I shared so far are the buckets that sort of
Mm.
created a need and has kept on sort of filling that. Leadership, like the last one, the leadership mentor, it's just someone who's known me since pretty much my early days on staff. I've been on staff for 25 years.
Mm.
So, and he's been instrumental. I think he and another person in InterVarsity, who's still with InterVarsity, both these men are, I wouldn't have been with this organization this long. There's been a lot of opportunity. Thank God for that. But those two folks have kept me along. They know me. They kept inviting me to the next thing. So it was sort of an easy, this mentor of mine had retired. He used to be also in national leadership with InterVarsity, but now is serving more as a leadership coach anyway. I was like, I'm gonna call up this brother, Paul Tokunaga. He's amazing. And he specializes. He wrote a book on Asian American leadership development. So called Invitation to Lead. So that was part of an easy call and there's already relationship there. That's probably more. There are times when I'll like reach out for like a moment or if there's somebody that I think could help or you could even get the mentoring through podcasts or books. I just find books are
Yeah.
like great, right? Like if you don't want to listen to their whole life story all the time, here's someone who's taken the time to write their best learning in a way that you could digest in 10 to 15 hours. How great. There are places where I might pop into somebody who might have something that can help me. So I just like to take it in. I just feel like if I stop learning, I will stop growing. And if I stop growing, I'm setting myself up for a fall. So it's more of that, and different interests hit me at different times. Yeah.
Yeah. You're very self-aware too. Do you like journal? Like how are like you're talking about like these certain things are kind of bubbling up. So how are you kind of staying in tune, like both spiritually and kind of mentally about things that are kind of impacting you?
Yeah, on top of the rhythms that I mentioned with the confessor and my friends, yeah, I do journal often. I'm not super religious. Like I don't journal every night or pull out a bullet. I don't bullet journal. Usually, actually, yeah, this is why I can't make my journal public ever in life, is because I usually go to it when I'm like distraught or mad at somebody, or I'm fuming about my children. And so it's just this dumping ground of like, I just need to figure sort of write it out. And I do find when I write it out, it just helps, right?
Mhm.
It becomes this process for me to like, okay, most of that's my fault. I said this, and starting to work that through with God. It's just a way for me to be really, really, I'm following the Psalms, just get real honest, right? Like break the teeth of the infant type of thing, just writing imprecatory kinds of language down on a journal. So yeah, I try. I'm not always fully, but I do think to tell my self-awareness. I believe who is it? Either Bob McLean, somebody said that self-awareness is the greatest tool you have for your own leadership development. And I've sort of taken that to heart. I try because most of the time I'm in conflict is my fault. At least I've contributed to it in some way. If I can at least own my contribution to it, I could probably find my way forward. And that's all led by his spirit, right? That's not me
Mhm.
figuring things out per se. These are real intentional times to say, okay, God. Now, after you just let it all out, you're like, okay, God, what do you want to say? Usually you're in a better place to hear after you get the stuff out.
Mm. What's great about that is my wife is really good about letting me know what she thinks about me. Any sort of area, right?
Mine too.
So she keeps me in check. So I have the spirit keeping me in check, and my wife
Yeah.
is there watching me, pointing out things like, "Hey, you need to be more present." And I'm like, "What? I'm here. Like I'm at home 24/7. What do you mean?" It's like, well, when
Right.
you know what I mean? But she's
Mhm.
good. She's good. And then I had to watch my reaction to it and like, oh, why did I react that way or think that way? Or make up that story in my head about what she wants the best for me. She loves
Right.
me, and she's going to point out things. She doesn't let things brew. She like
Mm.
I'm the kind of person I'll just like hold it in because I want to avoid conflict.
I
She's like she doesn't want to hold anything in. She just tells me immediately if something's bothering her, which is awesome.
mm, yes.
But I'm like so sensitive. I like break down, like
Mm.
falling apart.
I hear that. Yeah. Yeah. Our family, we're all Korean. And my wife grew up in Korea till she was 14. So it's like the kimchi fire is live in this house. No one holds back on emotions. No one's afraid of conflict. So you get feedback in real time, and the kids need to learn. Yeah, my kids are super lippy. That's our fault. We raised them that way, but they let us know where they are. So I hear that, and the
That's
feedback's so
good.
helpful, right?
Yeah,
Very helpful.
that's good. It's good to have like the way we raise our kids. Like we want them to express themselves, so we're always asking their opinions. Why do they feel that way? When I'm sharing something, what they want them to do, I'm trying to explain to them why I'm asking them to do that to give them context. Obviously, there's some times where it's like, it's because I said so, but a lot of times I try to give them like, here's why I think this is better for you to go this way. I wanted to ask you about your calling to ministry.
Maybe I'll try to make a long story short. But it's basically I went to it's apropos. I'm not trying to brag, but I went to MIT. So the idea wasn't to be in ministry at all when I went to college. I had the dream of sort of consumer electronics, sort of what Steve Jobs kind of did. Was get into that and sort of make a nest egg, and then retire into teaching in the inner city, since I went to inner city schools. So that was the idea behind that. It happened. It was for me. It was like an experience that happened. I felt so. Then my freshman year in college, I joined a fraternity and really fell away from Jesus. It was a bad scene of dancing on tables and swallowing live goldfish. That whole biz. Coming back to Jesus, and I'm at a retreat at my church my sophomore year, and Korean church Saturday night. So, the prayer is loud and heavy. And I get the sense that God wants to tell me something. So I go up into my room to a quiet room upstairs. And I say, okay, Lord, what do you have for me? And I see the word ministry flash before my eyes. And I understood that to mean full-time vocational ministry. And I went, oh, Lord, no, 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 no. That is not why I came here. That is not what we're doing. And when I see the word ministry flash before my eyes again and understand that to mean like this is a call. And so then I go, okay, well, Lord, if that's you, you're going to affirm that. You're going to confirm that with somebody. Somebody's going to tell me today that I'm supposed to go into ministry, so that's the prayer. I go back down, and then sort
Yeah,
of later that evening, a senior who's a leader in our church ministry at Wellesley College sort of came up to me and said, James, have you ever thought about full-time ministry? Because I think you'd be really good at it. And I went, no, who told you to say that? And she just goes, without any kind of hesitation, well, I just felt like God was telling me to tell you that. And I just went, oh, you're kidding. So
wow.
I went back to tell my dad. I called my dad getting home on a Sunday. And I go, I think I got this call to ministry. I'm thinking of changing majors. What do you think?
Yeah,
And what I remember my dad saying was like, give it a week. And if you still feel like God's calling you to it, then go for it. Right. So I
really.
just hear like openness and blessing. What my dad goes through is the same thing. So then I am my father's son, right? So then he gets off the phone and he's freaking out and he's going to God. He's a devout Christian man, just devoutly following the Lord. He goes, I did not send my son to go to MIT so that he
Right.
could go to ministry, right? And just is all out praying, Lord, change his call, change his mind every single day till Wednesday is what he said. And what happened then on Wednesday was he's praying earnestly, trying to get him to change my mind. And he hears God ask him like this question. He hears God ask him, whose son is he? Is he yours or is he mine?
Hmm.
Right? Just punching my Asian father, Korean dad in the face spiritually. And my dad, this is a testament to who he is. He goes, well, Lord, after just much consideration, of course he's yours. Of course he's yours.
Hmm.
And so then the next Sunday, I go like, I feel called to it. And he goes, okay. And he just gives me his blessing. And really from there,
Wow.
I didn't hear this story, his backstory, until like years later from that point. Like I think 8 to 10 years after that, he goes into the pastorate after me. Right. And so then it's this place
Oh,
where he's asking me for advice for his seminary classes. I go, Dad, stop asking me for advice. You're freaking me out. So he's leading this, what we call a 1.5 generation ministry. So like people here in America who are steeped in Korean culture probably came over as teenagers. And he's leading a youth and college ministry of Korean speaking, basically expats to here, to America. And he's invited me to speak through a translator because my Korean's terrible. And then he's sharing this story for the first time in front as he's introducing me to
oh,
speak.
wow.
So, and I know enough Korean to
You never
understand.
heard that story. You never heard that
Not
story
to that
before.
point. I was like, what, 24, 5, 6 at that point, and I just, so maybe, yeah, 5, 6 years later, and I'm weeping as I'm going up to the lectern because, just my dad, he's such a man of faith. If I'm half the man my dad is when I'm his
Mm,
age, my life would be a success. And he's
mm.
really sort of you didn't ask this, but he's fourth generation spiritual descendant of the Pyongyang revivals, and I'm fifth generation then, and that's we just both my dad
Wow.
and I just learned this story about our history and family history spiritually, but we're connected to those revivals, and sort of makes sense why my dad would be so faithful. Yep, but that story's for another time.
Wow. What a beautiful story. That's so powerful. Like you just said something about that was very powerful too, that, if I could be half the man my dad was, what would be some things that he taught you? Because you're a father now. What would be
Mhm.
some things that he taught you as a father and as a spiritual man of God that you've like taken on and adapted to your own fatherhood?
There's a bunch of things there. My dad was a pretty quote unquote westernized, Americanized Korean father. For someone who immigrated here after college, then he took college again at the University of Arkansas, of all places. Imagine this Korean
Wow.
immigrant. And he has stories of shooting bullfrogs in swamp type of thing and having a blast. I was like, okay. Um, but he raised us similarly to speak our minds. I think when asked about my mom and dad were having a fight, argument, not a mean, but just disagreement. This was a meal at my college graduation. So my family's out, my parents are fighting, and about how they raised us, just sort of going back and forth. And my mom says, "You raised them with too much freedom," is what my mom says, because we were very lippy and disrespectful growing up. And my dad says, "But look at how responsible they are. When they say they're going to do something, they do it, right?" And it just was this, oh, Dad, you're so Jedi.
Hmm.
He let us talk back. He encouraged a conversation about things we disagree with. In the end, though, if there was a decision made, if we didn't change his mind, it was abided. So there was never a sneaking out of the house. It was a talk things out and try to change his mind. And if not, we're there. So he raised us to be like people of our word and to speak it as well as to honor it if we say we're going to do something. That's a huge gift. My dad's a man of integrity and he wanted us to have it, but it wasn't like a rigid integrity. It was a very soft relational one. You just didn't want to bum your dad out. And so gave us that. And then his piety to this day, my mom and dad pray at 5 o'clock in the morning at church during
Mm.
COVID. They got the keys to the church. They're the only ones that get to
Wow.
go, but they go. And they're not pastors, they're not on staff. They just know that praying every day is not only good for the church, it's good for them.
Mm.
And
Mm.
they love the local church. They would love for me to leave the parachurch, honestly, right? My dad being a Presbyterian pastor and I'm ordained Vineyard. Yeah, he likes to tease me a lot, calls me Miracle Boy all the time. but he would love for me to be a pastor of a local church. He loves the local church and
Mm.
would just has given so much of his life as an elder and then a second career pastor to the life of the church. And without idealism, he never leaves it, thick or thin.
Mm.
Uh, I think that's what a gift. He's so loyalty to communities, and I think I'm wired the same way. And part of that is just like no church is going to meet all our needs. That's a crazy expectation to have. So I just come to Sunday. I don't have a demand that it feed me. It's sort of, I try to live what we write. Like, I've killed my expectations. I'm raising expectancy. I'm here because it's a discipline to stay connected to this community, even online. And Lord, you'll do something with that. And honestly, that's helped me so much because I had my darker days where I just be like, I can't believe that guy said that, or I can't believe this. What is that? We're singing the same songs from 30 years ago. I could go into that zone. And my father, he lives just a mile away now, so I see him. I
Hmm.
still see him a bunch. It's just I've taken on more of his temperament and said, love, love isn't. You don't love perfect things. You just love because you're called to, and stay and help. Uh, So I think those are things that finally in my 40s I'm embracing more rather than trying to fight everything and asking God what he wants to do and not take up battles that are beyond what he wants me to take up.
Mm. That's beautiful. How how is he as a husband, and how did he model like being a husband, and how did that impact you?
Oh, what a huge gift. And no, I used to feel bad. So my mom and dad, growing up, my mom worked at the post office night shift. So I really didn't see her at all until the weekends. So it was my dad who provided the emotional support and
Hmm.
presence. And that's probably why we're so tight. Um, and then add though, so I rarely saw them together, right, growing up. And then when they were together, they went to church together because they were always serving at church, both of them. So I saw them by proxy. Now my mom retired from the post office, they moved down to LA to be closer to us, and they've been here for about, well, how old's my daughter? 6, so about 5 years they've been here. Um, and they're like, it's like they're dating again. They're like always together and they're having a blast and they're laughing at each other. And sure, they have the moments where they pick on each other, but they clearly like being together. It's really fun. And so that in that way, it's weird that I'm seeing that now because I didn't see it so much, but it makes sense that they would like each other. They both have kind of effervescent personalities that way. They tend to be the kinds of people that right when they came to this new church in LA, like all of a sudden everyone's their friend. They